When my wife and I started our farm 26 years ago, we were commercial farmers. We cleared off the land, planted our blueberries, installed a pump, irrigation system, and used pesticides and fertilizers to grow our crop. A couple years later, we transitioned to organic, and I exchanged the synthetic fertilizers for manure and the chemical pesticides for naturally occurring materials. A couple years after that, we began to try and rewild our farm. Our goal was to try and make our farm completely self-reliant. What we wanted to do is stop buying pesticides and fertilizers, organic or otherwise, and see if we could just produce our crop with what our land provided. This is what, for 14 years, nature has provided all the pesticides, all the fertilizer, and all the pollination needed to produce our crop. This is what ecologists call ecosystem services. And by exchanging purchased material with services provided by nature, we've been able to reduce our operating costs, improve our yields, and minimize our risk of crop failure. But most importantly, we've improved the quality of our berries, and we've reduced and shrunk our ecological footprint. To do this, we had to reimagine our farm. We had to redirect our focus from optimizing, maximizing crop yields to trying to integrate our farm fully into our ecological neighborhood. We took a step back and started to look at our farm on how it fit into the larger landscape. And we tried to understand what were the relationships between our land, our property, and our geologic province, our climate zone, our watershed, and our ecoregion. And it may not seem like it, but right here, where we all are sitting right now, is part of a watershed. And when rain falls on the roof of this building, where does it go? Does it go to recharge an aquifer, or does it go to pollute a local stream? So thinking about our farm from this perspective produced some really surprising results. We were able to identify and adopt ecosystem services that actually provided economic benefits. Gophers and their transformation from foes to friend do a great job of illustrating how all this works. When we first planted our berries, they were tiny little plants just getting started, and as soon as we put them in the ground, the gophers moved in and started feeding on the roots. So I did what any reasonable farmer would do. I started killing gophers. Each year, I would dig down into their tunnels, set my traps, and after a couple years, it became apparent that the gophers were winning. No surprise there. Their populations kept growing, and their burrows kept expanding. But I looked carefully at this time. By this time, the plants were like several feet tall and actually growing really well. And so I was looking, look, why is this happening? And it's really, I can attribute it to the coyotes that had moved into the farm and were digging up the gopher dens and eating the gophers. Blueberry plants have the bulk of their roots, the concentration of their roots are in the top 12 inches of the soil. And so with gophers patrolling the surface, with coyotes patrolling the surface, this turns out to be really dangerous territory for gophers. So gophers changed their behavior, they started feeding deeper, and now they were eating the roots of weeds and grasses, both of which I could live with. So at this point, I retired my gopher traps and took another look at that and said, you know, these gophers really aren't doing that much damage. But what I didn't understand at this time is that the gophers were actually making a huge contribution to the success of my farm, and that's the second part of this story. Blueberry bushes require 80% of their flowers to set to produce a commercial crop. And if you want big berries, the fat ones, you need the pollen from one bush to be transferred over to another bush. To do this, most blueberry growers saturate their fields with rented honeybee hives. Here's Joe. And the big advantage there is you can bring those bees in at the exact right time and the exact right numbers so that you ensure you're going to have adequate pollination. The downside is that, oops, skipped one here, sorry. The downside is that honeybees don't fly in real cold weather, and they don't particularly like blueberry flowers. They're not their favorites. Blueberry flowers are long and skinny, and the honeybee needs to climb in all the way up to their shoulder to be able to reach the nectar, as you can see in this slide. So 20 years ago, we took a leap of faith and switched over, stopped running honeybee hives, and switched over to native pollinators. On our farm, we have blue orchard bees, sweat bees, butterflies, and even hummingbirds will work our blueberry flowers. But by far and away, our best pollinators are bumblebees. Bumblebees and blueberries are both native to North America, and they evolved together. So bumblebees are ideally suited to pollinate blueberry flowers. Bumblebees have a really long tongue. They can reach down into the flower, and because they're heavy and large and the manner in which they fly, they sonicate or vibrate flowers at takeoff and landing. Bumblebees, as you can see again in this image, are also basically flying around in fur coats. And with their long hair and rapid wing beats, it generates a lot of static electricity. So this static electricity also helps them when they land on the flower to collect and distribute pollen from one plant to the next. So, bumblebees, like the coyotes, are free. They're an ecosystem service that I don't have to pay for. All I have to do is wait for them to show up in sufficient numbers at the exact right time to pollinate my crop. The problem is when your entire year's income is dependent on an insect that you don't control, this is easier said than done. And doing the math doesn't help. So on my 8.5 acres of blueberries, they will produce about 20 million flowers. And if I need the pollen from one flower to be transferred to another flower, I need 40,000 bee visits to make all this work. Blueberry flowers are receptive for about 3 to 6 days, and they flower over a 6-week period. So basically what I need is a whole bunch of bees to show up in force and work intensively for this little tiny period of time. So where do all these bees come from? And what can I do as a farm manager to make sure they show up year after year? So the first thing I do is I don't apply pesticide, so I'm not poisoning these bees. Second thing I do is I provide them with water and food, a steady stream of flowers all season long. And on our farm, we've let a significant portion of our land go back into native habitat, its natural state, and we now have over 90 different species of plants living on our farm. All of those plants produce flowers, and so the bumblebees can migrate from one floral source to the next as the season progresses. All I have to do is ensure that when the blueberries start to flower, they're still the prime attraction on the bumblebees' pollination circuit. So the last thing I do to keep the bumblebees on our farm is I provide them a safe and secure place to spend the winter. This brings us all the way back to the gophers. It turns out that one of the best places for a bumblebee to build its nest and overwinter is in an abandoned gopher den. So these gophers, my friends the gophers, are busy building bee homes and play a really important role in the successful pollination of my crop. Along with the bumblebees, the gophers, and the coyotes, we have also identified and adopted other ecosystem services that help secure our supply of water, control pests, and provide nutrients for our crop. All these services are free. On our farm, biodiversity is an asset, not a liability. Thank you.